On behalf of the 26 Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant bishops of our region who are Christian associates, I bring you their greeting as we celebrate this national holiday of Thanksgiving. As a kid, we called it Decoration Day. Now it's Memorial Day. But then early in the morning, I would wrap the coffee cans in the mayonnaise jars with tin foil. And I'd fill a few jugs of water and put them in the car trunk. All the while that Mom was cutting peonies and mock orange blossoms, iris and poppies and other flowers and whatever greens were in bloom at that time. Before long, we were off to Bly Cemetery in Dallastown, and then to Mount Zion Cemetery just north of York. At each cemetery, we would place improvised vases of flowers on the most immediate of the Flinchball and Snyder family graves. Now, with 12 siblings on either side of my maternal grandparents' family, there weren't enough flowers to go back and decorate the 4 and 5 generations who preceded them, who were buried in those two cemeteries. Mom's family were German immigrants who could trace their ancestry to colonial America. They came as aliens to a strange land. And in central Pennsylvania, within William Penn's holy experiment, they prospered. But even in our earliest years as colonies and nations, there was xenophobia, fear of the other, fear of the stranger. Even though our British colonies wanted to escape the authority of King George, they were still English. That was their native language and custom, and would be the language and culture of this new land called America. But the Germans were overtaking the English. God forbid. In Harrisburg, bills were being published by the legislature both in English and in German. We were a bilingual colony, and even Benjamin Franklin was alarmed. Franklin warned about German immigrants overrunning America. He warned the Germans were too stupid to learn English and therefore represented a political threat to America. He wrote, "Those who come hither are generally of the most ignorant, stupid sort of their own nation. And as few of the English understand the German language, and so cannot address them either from the press or pulpit, it is almost impossible to remove any prejudices they once entertained. Not being used to liberty, they know not how to make a modest use of it. I remember when they modestly declined intermeddling in our elections, but now they come in droves and carry all before them, except in 1 or 2 counties. In short, unless the stream of their importation could be turned from this to other colonies, they will soon so outnumber us that all the advantages we have will not, in my opinion, be able to preserve our language, and even our government will become precarious." The other objection that Ben Franklin had to German immigrants was their swarthy complexion, which was an affront to the purely white people who originally settled in America. Again, Franklin wrote, "Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens, who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our anglicizing them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion?" Franklin sounded a lot like the rantings of a certain legislature from Cranberry. Indeed, we are a nation of aliens. Whether German or English, this land we call America is not our own. My wife Kathy's grandmother, 16-year-old Matilda Ronhilda Jacobson, and her 18-year-old sister Karen landed at Ellis Island from Norway. They boarded a train that would take them over the once sovereign nations of the Iroquois, the Sioux, the Crow, and the Chinook, until they arrived in Seattle. These teenage immigrants were aliens, traveling across the land that once belonged to another, a land which was not their own. Most of us have long forgotten that this nation we call America was not our ancestors' native land. Few, if any of us present tonight, are descendants of indigenous peoples. In one sense or another, we are all aliens in this land, which we call the United States of America, and whose National Day of Thanksgiving we celebrate this night. You see, there's nothing uniquely Christian about this holiday. It is a secular commemoration to which we need to create a biblical context. And the Deuteronomist in our first lesson gives us that context. It is the harvest festival for the people of Israel and Judah. Out of gratitude to Yahweh for the bounty of the harvest, they bring their offerings, the first fruits of the harvest, before the priests. They return to the Lord and in service of God's people, the first fruits of their labors and of their land. That rite reminds the people, when the priest takes the basket from your hand and sets it down before the altar of the Lord your God, you shall make this response before the Lord your God. A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien. Few in number, and there he became a great nation, mighty and populous. When the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us by imposing hard labor on us, we cried to the Lord, the God of our ancestors. The Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil and our oppression. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a terrifying display of power and with signs and wonders. He brought us into this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now, I bring the first fruit of the ground that you, O Lord, have given me. You shall set it down before the Lord your God and bow down before the Lord your God. Then you, together with the Levites and the aliens who reside among you, shall celebrate with all the bounty that the Lord your God has given to you and to your house. A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. The sons of Jacob in time of famine emigrated from their homeland to Egypt in search of food and life. Those Israelites were aliens in Egypt. They spoke a language different from the Egyptians. Their culture and lifestyle were foreign to their hosting neighbors. And like many immigrant communities throughout the ages, their birth rates were higher than the receiving country. And thus they quickly became a threat to the host land. God had intervened in their history. When once welcomed, now they became a perceived threat by the Egyptians. Welcoming hospitality turned to slavery and harsh labor. And you know the rest of the story of the Exodus. Yahweh's signs and wonders, freedom and a new land to call their home. The land of the Canaanites would become their homeland. It would be a land of milk and honey, a new homeland of bounty imposes an obligation among his chosen people. Remember your roots. Remember from whence you came. You were once alien and exiles in a strange land, and so treat the alien who is now in your midst with hospitality and welcome. Ours is the story of the second Exodus, a story of deliverance from bondage to sin and death into the freedom of God's sovereign reign through the sacrificial death of Jesus upon the cross. The epistle writer reminds us that as those marked by the saving cross of Jesus Christ in the waters of baptism, we will always be aliens and exiles in this life. Our calling will always set us apart and at odds with the prevailing culture. As much as we want to sing, God bless America, this nation and land are not our homeland. Heaven is our home, and all that you and I can do in this lifetime is to model that coming sovereign reign of peace, life, love, and abundance in our actions toward one another. Because you and I were once exiles, bound in sin, but are now free. And because of that freedom, we are now aliens living in hope of a better future. We too are to respond with the first fruits, with our gifts to sustain the praise of God who raised our dead brother from death to life, and just as importantly, to care for the needs of the alien in our midst, Mexican or Somali, Burmese or Arab, documented or undocumented alike. Tomorrow we will feast. Hopefully we will pause long enough for everyone at the table to articulate that for which we are thankful, ever mindful that all good gifts come from God alone. Hopefully we'll cheer a Steelers victory over the Ravens, and we'll begin the harried race to malls and big box stores. It will be hard to remember that we too are aliens in this great nation, the United States of America. We are aliens in quest of a different way of living than overindulgence, conspicuous consumption, oppressing the stranger, and blaming the poor for their circumstances. But tonight we remember with a meal the reason for our Thanksgiving. A peasant child, an itinerant preacher, a wonder worker who was cast out as an alien among his own people, crucified as an enemy of the nation. But God raised him from death to life so that we might die with him and be raised to new life. Jesus Christ, crucified and risen, is our only source of thanksgiving. He gives himself as food and drink, enough to sustain us in our alien journey in this land, in our responsive praise of his Father, and in our care for the other aliens in our midst. So with flinch balls